wickedness has gotten so great that okay, we're good. All right, Israel's wickedness has gotten so great. Now I can hear things. They've gotten so great that God says, I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. I'm done. So in 2 Kings 17, it says, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, son of Eliah, became king of Israel and Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, came up to attack Hoshea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal and had paid him tribute. So Israel at this point, you got Shalmaneser up here. He's a pretty heavy-duty king. The king of Assyria, he's controlling this area, as we're going to find out. He even controlled Babylon and those areas at this time. Assyria was kind of the big kingdom. And Israel had been paying tribute to them, and that has kept them safe. Well, they decide, we're not gonna. So this is where we kind of get to. It says, but the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, the king of Egypt. And So is the guy's name. It says, So, the king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria. Hoshea in Israel goes, we don't need to pay him tribute. I'm going to start paying tribute to Egypt and let them protect us, because Egypt looks like a bigger bully than even Assyria is. So we're going to pay them, and they'll protect us from Assyria. So it says, as he had done year by year, therefore Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala, in Kozan, in the Habor River, and in the towns of the Medes. So again, the Assyrian mindset with conquest was they would take over a land, and they would take the people that dwelt in that land, and they would scatter them all over their kingdom. So we're going to take this group of people, and we're going to send them up into the area of the Medes. So way north, way east, over towards Iran. And they said, now you guys live here. And then they took another group of people, and they deported them and stuck them up in, say, modern Turkey. Then they took another group of people, and they deported them and stuck them in another place in their kingdom. And by doing so, they figured what they would do is they would turn them into Assyrians, essentially. You don't have a huge group of people, you have a smaller group, you make them incorporate into the other areas of your kingdom, and the people who formerly lived there, they're living somewhere else now. And so you got people from other countries that are living there as well, and they all become a melting pot, and nobody is really feeling the need to defend that land other than for Assyria. We don't have a homeland anymore. So we're now Assyrians. And so they have to melt together, they have to learn the common language, they have to work together to survive, and so therefore you've got people that have become part of the new system rather than keeping their independence. So that was their mentality, is we just scatter people. And also, you keep them from being a very large group, and then they're less likely to rebel. Because if you've only got a couple hundred people here from this area, they're not as big of a threat as if you have several thousand from that group, because then they could put together a little army and they can start fighting against you. But if there's not that many of them, they're not going to uprise against a big mobilized army. So they're going to stay kind of calm. So that's what they did. They scattered them. It says all this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God. That is a really important phrase right there. This did not happen because God could not protect them. So understand that. Assyria did not conquer God. They conquered Israel technically because God turned Israel over to them. He's the one who told Shalmaneser, you can come and conquer Israel. He's the one who allowed them to come and take over that area because God had already he had sent prophets to them. He'd done miracles there. He had done all these great things. He'd even sent in oppressors to oppress them and then came and delivered them from these oppressors. He sent armies in and they conquered Israel in little bits, and then God delivered them from those people. And so this just kept going on, and finally God said, I've had enough. Nothing is getting through to these people. You would think Elijah calling down fire from heaven and, lighting that fire and then killing all those prophets of Baal would make people go, maybe we should think more about God. But it didn't. And so God finally said, enough's enough. And if you go all the way back to when they came into that land, God said, this is the land I'm giving you. These are the promises I'm making to you. If you keep my decrees and my laws, none of these bad things will happen to you. But if you don't, all of these bad things will happen to you. And some of them were conquest. People would come in and conquer them. People would come in and take over their land. They would oppress them. They would do these things. Now, I want you to think for just a second, okay? We're going to kind of twist it. God would not be a God that we could trust and believe if he didn't overthrow them. Because he said he would. He said, if you worship other idols, if you break all my laws, if you break my decrees, I am going to send an army in, basically. I'm going to send someone in to take you into captivity. So he told them this is going to happen, basically, all these things. If he had not done it, he wouldn't be a just and righteous God. If he just said, don't worry about it, I'll just let you do what you want, then how could we trust the other things that he said? How could we trust that Christ is returning? How could we trust that Jesus died for our sins? That he was born of a virgin, that he was born in Bethlehem, that he died on the cross, that he rose again on the third day. All these things that we have in Scripture, if he had not kept his promise of punishing Israel when they rebelled against him, we would say, well, then God is somebody who's kind of circumstantial, and we don't know if it's really going to happen that way or not. But instead, God said, this is how it's going to play out, and it did exactly the way he said. And the prophets that he sent to warn the people, it happened exactly the way the prophets prophesied it. And so it's important to understand that God did this because he is a just and righteous God. Same token, no one comes to the Father except through the Son. God means it. If he doesn't mean it, if he doesn't do that, how can we trust him? But he's always true to his word. And that's what we have here. The prophets prophesied against these nations, and so it happened exactly as God foretold it. And it's exactly as God told his prophets, and it became the promise. So they came and they did this because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them. That's the crazy thing. God drove out the nations before them because of their wickedness. Israel came in and repeated their wickedness. Why would they not think they were going to get driven out? It's as well as the practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. The Israelites secretly did things against the Lord, their God, that were not right. From watchtower to fortified city, they built themselves high places in all their towns. They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. At every high place they burned incense, as the nations whom the Lord had driven out before them had done. They did wicked things that aroused the Lord's anger. They worshipped idols, though the Lord had said, "You shall not do this." The Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers, "Turn from your evil ways, observe my commands and decrees in accordance with the entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey, and that I delivered to you through my servants the prophets." But they would not listen and were as stiff-necked as their ancestors, who did not trust in the Lord their God. Because that's the other thing you have to remember is one of the reasons that they turned to other gods and idols was they were worshiping them for the blessings that they were looking for that God had already promised them. God promised them, your crops will not fail. So what do? They go start worshiping idols for fertility. They didn't trust God. God said, I got it. Your land is going to be fertile. They went, well, it doesn't hurt to hedge our bets a little bit here. So they started worshiping idols. They started worshiping gods for fertility. They started looking to other gods for protection, but God said, I will protect you. No army will stand against you. Well, maybe we should get a little extra help. And so God, by them turning to other little g gods, to idols and things, they were essentially saying, God, I don't believe you and I don't trust your promises. We're looking for all the things you promised us, but we don't trust you that you're going to give them to us. And so they turned to other gods. It says they rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors and the statutes that he had warned them to keep. They followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. They imitated the nations around them, although the Lord had ordered them, do not do as they do. They forsook all the commands of the Lord their God and made for themselves 2 idols cast in the shape of calves and an Asherah pole. They bowed down to all the starry hosts and they worshiped Baal. They sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They practiced divination and sought omens. They sold themselves to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left, and even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God. They followed the practices that Israel had introduced. Therefore the Lord rejected all the people of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hands of plunderers until he thrust them from his presence. When he tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned through all his servants the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there. That's the northern tribes. They're in exile. Now, if you want to go ahead and continue reading in chapter 17, because we're going to stop there at verse 23, you'll find out that Assyria, like they did to the people of Israel, brought other people from other lands and put them into Israel. They settled them in Samaria and in the land of Israel. And the interesting thing is they started to get attacked by lions. Lions came and started killing all the people that the Assyrians were putting into the land. And so they're like, man, we can't figure this out. So they said, you know what we need to do is go get a priest from Israel. And so they went and got a priest from Israel, and they brought him back to Samaria and said, teach the people the God whose land this is. Tell them whose land this is. Tell them what God is here. And when the priest told them about the one true God, the lions stopped killing people. But as long as they were doing their own evil practices, God's like, if I'm going to kick my own people out of here for doing this, I'm sure not going to let you come into my land and do this. So he started killing them people with lions. So God's serious about what he had told them and what he was doing there. So we're going to now jump ahead. That was Israel. That's the northern tribes. They are gone. This is around 722 BC, or BCE if you want to go with BCE. So 722, they are pretty much finito. And then in 2 Kings 24 and 25, we get the story of Judah. And so this is the end of Judah. This is the end of, well, not the end of, but this is during Jeremiah. So we studied about him last week. This is happening during this time frame. So it says, during Jehoiakim's reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded the land. And Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. But then he turned against Nebuchadnezzar and rebelled. The Lord sent Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against him to destroy Judah. In accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by his servants the prophets, surely these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command in order to remove them from his presence because of the sins of Manasseh and all that he had done, including the shedding of innocent blood, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. Judah had had the same issues, and sometimes even a little bit more. Manasseh came in and did these wicked things. They had had a time of revival. Manasseh comes in, turns it over back into wickedness. They come out of Hezekiah, they go into Manasseh. It's just a bad situation. So we have these moments of kind of like light in the darkness for Judah. But there's still that wickedness. And underlying even their times of kind of a revival, that wickedness prevailed. And so God allowed them a little longer, but still, as a just God, had to punish them for the sins that he warned them about and warned them against, and they continued to commit. You know, God is only going to put up with this for so long. And then finally he says there's a time of reckoning. And he tried, again, through prophets. You have prophet after prophet that comes in and says, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to repent. And they just refused to listen. They would get one king that would do something really good, and then they turn around and go right back into the sins that had been committed before them. So Judah was there. This is around 605 BC is what we're going to be reading about here initially. And it says, as for the other events of Jehoiakim's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Jehoiakim rested with his ancestors, and Jehoiachin, his son, succeeded him as king. The king of Egypt did not march out from his own country again because the king of Babylon had taken all his territory, from the Wadi of Egypt to the Euphrates River. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. Long reign, huh? His mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan. She was from Jerusalem. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. At that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And Nebuchadnezzar himself came up to the city while his officers were besieging it. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and his officials all surrendered to him. In the eighth year of the reign of the king of Babylon, he took Jehoiachin prisoner. As the Lord had declared, Nebuchadnezzar removed the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace, and cut up the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. He carried all Jerusalem into exile, all the officers and fighting men, and all the skilled workers and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people of the land were left. So here's a different philosophy. Babylon comes in, and they lay siege to Jerusalem. When they send initially his advisors and stuff, and Nebuchadnezzar comes over, they eventually surrender to him. They lay siege to it. They eventually surrender to him. Babylon's philosophy was, we're not going to scatter you to other lands because that's less productive for us. It might keep you from rebelling, but we're not worried about you rebelling. We got a powerful enough army. If you rebel, we'll kill you. So we're not worried about that. What we want is your productivity. We want you to make us better. So when they come into Jerusalem, they take all the skilled craftsmen, they take all the skilled fighters, they take all the educated people, they take all the people that have trades, and they pack them up and take them to Babylon. And they said, now You work for us. So the king has 10,000 more skilled people in his nation now. And so, well, there's 3 times actually the deal. The first time is when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and all them go. That was in 605. Nebuchadnezzar comes, they lay siege to it, they take the first group in. And then about 597, they have a second deportation. That's when Nebuchadnezzar comes, and that's when like Ezekiel was taken. And another group of people were taken back. And then there's a third siege, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. On the third siege is when they actually come in and destroy the walls of Jerusalem and burn the temple and all that kind of stuff. So it's a 3-phase deportation for Judah. Initially, it was, Jehoiachin that time. Like I said, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those guys all go with the 10,000 plus people. And then the second time is when Ezekiel goes, and that's when another whole group of people came, and just the poorest of them were then left. So it's actually kind of a phase in there. And then, so it says, Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiachin captive to Babylon. He also took from Jerusalem to Babylon the king's mother, his wives, his officials, and the prominent people of the land. The king of Babylon also deported to Babylon the entire force of 7,000 fighting men, strong and fit for war, and 1,000 skilled workers and artisans. He made Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. So Zedekiah is a king that is serving by appointment of Nebuchadnezzar. So he's a king of Israel, but he's really not even a vassal king of Babylon. He's an appointed king of Babylon. He's more like a governor that serves under Nebuchadnezzar. It says Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done. It was because of the Lord's anger that all this happened to Jerusalem and Judah, and in the end he thrust them from his presence. Now Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon, so in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. He encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. For 2 years, they locked this place down. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled at night through the gate. Between the 2 walls near the king's garden, though the Babylonians were surrounding the city, they fled towards the Arabah. But the Babylonian army pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his soldiers were separated from him and scattered. And he was captured. He was taken to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where sentence was pronounced on him. And I'm going to tell you, Zedekiah has a horrible sentence pronounced on him. So be prepared for a very harsh response by Nebuchadnezzar to a rebellious king that was under him. It says they killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. So they took the king and killed his sons, killed his family. Then they put out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. So the last thing that he saw was his family being killed. And then they put his eyes out, just so he'd remember it. On the 7th day of the 5th month in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard and official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burnt down. The whole Babylonian army under the commander of the imperial guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace of those who had deserted to the king of Babylon. But the commander left behind some of the poorest people in the land to work the vineyards and the fields. The Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands, and the bronze sea that were at the temple of the Lord, and they carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles used in the temple service. The commander of the imperial guard took away the censers and sprinkling bowls, all that were made of pure gold or silver. And that's where we're going to stop the reading tonight. But you can see, again, it's a 3-phase deportation to Babylon. And if any articles of the temple, this is the big question mark for the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark that sat in the Holy of Holies. If it was still in the Holy of Holies when Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem, it is gone. It has been melted down, destroyed, finito, it's Gandhi. The larger articles of the temple were destroyed. The smaller temple articles, and it's interesting that they would talk about some of these bronze articles, but in particular here at the end of gold and silver, right? All these bowls and cups and whatever else, blah, blah, blah. Well, they come back to play in the time of Daniel, and we'll see that in the book of Daniel, as they were mocking God using these to have a big party. And so they come back into play. We know that they are in Babylon. It says they were taken there. We have a count of them being there. We have them account being abused. We also have a count of a lot of them coming back. They are returned when they come back under Ezra and Nehemiah, well, Nehemiah first, and then Ezra. They come back to rebuild Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple, which is at the end of 70 years. That's the time that God allowed them to be taken and allotted them to be taken. But it says they returned with a lot of those items. Big ticket items, the bronze sea, the bronze pillars, the capitals on top of the pillars, that kind of stuff. It tells you right here, they were smashed, melted down, taken back to Babylon. They didn't care about the articles. They wanted the materials. And so same thing, a lot of the gold articles that were made by Solomon that remained in the temple at this time were taken. They were melted down. They were gone. So again, the big question mark is, at this time, where's the ark? Did they remove it from the Holy of Holies? Did the Levites come in and zip it off to Ethiopia where it sits in the little hut to this day? Or is it in the caves below Jerusalem, locked into some catacomb area that's sealed off and there it sits? Or is it under the wall of Jerusalem? Because that's another theory, that when they were reinforcing the walls before the last big conquest, they actually put it underneath the walls and then built the walls on top of it so it couldn't be found. We don't know. We don't know. Some people think they know. Maybe they do. I do not. I will tell you right now. I have no clue. But if it was still in the temple, it's gone. Because the things that were not returned with the people when they came back to rebuild Jerusalem were gone. And they're lost to time. So both Israel and Judah were taken into captivity, like I said initially, not because God couldn't protect them, but because God is a just and righteous God. And he kept his word. Oh, he was very patient, incredibly patient. They wouldn't have lasted the hundreds of years they did if he wasn't incredibly patient. They'd have never made it out of the wilderness if he wasn't incredibly patient. But, God shows his patience, but he also shows his justice. And that's the thing that, makes God such a righteous God. He is the one true God, and he is righteous, and he is just, and he is holy, and he does what he says. And so when he told the people, this is how this ends if you don't listen to me, that's the way it ended. And he spoke through his prophets, and he spoke through his law, and he spoke through his word, and people didn't take heed. So God brought this justice on them. And then, true to his word of Judah, 70 years later, Persia, who then came and took over Babylon, allows them to come back and rebuild. Because the Assyrians, I've told you this before, I'll tell you this again. Assyrians, their philosophy is scatter the people. Babylonians, their philosophy is take them to Babylon, put them in our provinces, and let them work for us. And they can make us a lot wealthier and a lot more prosperous because we have all their technologies added with our technologies, added with our skilled craftsmen. We benefit, we reap all the benefits from things from other nations. So that's what they wanted to do. The Persians came in and went, we don't want to bring all these people and have them living in these kind of cities because then we have to deal with them. So their philosophy was send people back to their homelands or let them stay in their homelands and then just tax the heck out of them. Because the people are happier if they're in their homeland. They're more prosperous, they are more productive, they have a reason to produce more goods and stuff, and then when they do, we'll just take a bigger portion of it. And so the Persians figured it out. We just want the bigger revenue that all these kingdoms can bring us, and we don't have to hassle with trying to reestablish and move them and, put guards on them and all that kind of stuff. And again, it's that philosophy of Assyria, we don't want people rising up against us. Babylon, we're not afraid of you. Persia, we will snuff you out in a minute if you try to uprise because they had an incredibly powerful army. And so they're like, if you even think about trying to bring some kind of an uprising, we will just smoke you, no problem. So they were not worried about people living in their own homelands. And so during that time, under God's providence, this is not something that just happened by happenstance. This is God's will. He had the people from Judah return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple so that they could come back and have that other chance with him, basically, because he was fulfilling his word and his prophecy, and it came true exactly as he had said. So we have to be careful with that, not to just ascribe the things that God has prophesied and planned to just the will of man and by happenstance. Persia did the things they did, not because they were Persia, but because God told them to do that. God had them bring Judah back. Called him by name. Yeah, God pretty good with his prophecy. Called him by name, gave the dates, everything. Told him 70 years later, boom, here you come. And so again, you can hear different philosophies of this. I don't want to get into it too much. If you count it from 605 BC, you go 70 years into it, and you get to about 535, and you go, oh, that's when everything was supposed to be, the end of their 70 years. Okay, that's about when Persia comes and takes over, and so you see this transition. Okay, that's what it is. If you take it from 586, which was when the temple was destroyed and the last deportation really took place, at 586, then that takes you to about 516, and that's when the temple was dedicated after Ezra and Nehemiah was rededicated in Jerusalem. So there's that 70-year window that no matter how you swing it, it fits. But to say it's exactly, it started on this date, so it ended on this date, is a little bit hard from our perspective because we're looking back on it in a non-linear calendar in a sense. But we do know the basic dates that all these things happened. And so it depends on if you want to talk from destruction to temple to rededication of temple. That is 70 years, and that's that 586 to 516. If you're talking about just simple captivity, the Babylonians came in, then you'd be talking about the Babylonians taking it from 605 on down 70 years, and then you get the Persians coming in. So how you want to see that prophecy fulfilled is kind of, I guess, the way you look at that. But regardless, it is a exact figure of how God planned it, and it's not our calendar, it's his. So but nonetheless, God fulfilled his word and kept his promise and did it just as he said. So all right, well, people at home, thank you for tuning in, thank you for watching. I'm glad we got everything figured out. I think we were having some sound issues or something, but